Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ryan Berg, and I'm a senior fellow with the Americas Program at CSIS. I also lead our Future of Venezuela initiative at CSIS. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation on environmental degradation in Venezuela. Before we formally begin, let's take care of logistics. This event will last approximately 60 minutes. Following the panelists' remarks and a moderated discussion, we will field questions from the audience. We ask our audience to please submit questions by clicking on the Ask Live Questions button on the event webpage. Today we have simultaneous interpretation. At the bottom of your screen, please click the globe button that says Interpretation, and then select the language you wish to listen in. Ahora en español. Tendremos interpretación simultánea para la audiencia hispanohablante. Para escuchar el evento en español, por favor haga clic sobre el icono del globo que encontrará en su pantalla y que dice Interpretation, y elija Español. I would also like to take a moment to thank our partners at the Latin America and the Caribbean Bureau of the U.S. Agency for International Development for their generous support. Again, good morning. Venezuela is one of the most ecologically endowed countries in the world. In addition to pristine beaches, lush forests, and magnificent sites such as Angel Falls, it also has immense biodiversity, including thousands of endemic species. This unique ecological heritage is reflected by the fact that Venezuela contains many environmentally protected areas. The policies and practices of the Maduro regime, as well as the regime's complicity in the environmentally degrading actions of criminal groups within the country, are placing the country's ecosystems at risk. Quite simply, Venezuela's environment is nearing a point of no return. The Orinoco mining arc, established by Maduro in 2016, cut straight through the aforementioned protected areas with deforestation and construction projects. Crude oil coats the country's once pristine shores due to lack of upkeep and spills by the state-owned oil company PDVSA. Between 2010 and 2016, there were an estimated 50,000 oil spills in Venezuela. Lack of oversight across the country creates a breeding ground for illicit networks, leading to encroachment on indigenous communities and human rights abuses. Fortunately, it is not too late for international actors from government and civil society to take action. COP26, the 26th meeting of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, will be held in Edinburgh, Scotland, in November of this year. In anticipation of the conference, government actors and voices from civil society have the chance to highlight the Maduro regime's abuses and call for action to counteract this environmental degradation before it's too late. Viewers can also find our associated policy brief on the role of Venezuela's oil sector in environmental degradation, a video on environmental degradation, and an excellent podcast episode of 35 West on the Maduro regime's policies and their effects on indigenous communities through the Amazon on the CSIS Americas website. Today, we have a distinguished panel of guests, and we want to address ways in which the international community can shine a spotlight on the Maduro regime's environmental negligence in advance of the upcoming COP26. Our panelists will share their insights on the impacts of corruption and bad governance on Venezuela's ecological health, and will provide specific, timely, and realistic recommendations for international actors to address these impacts. Our keynote speaker today is Michael Eddy, the Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator at the USAID Latin America and Caribbean Bureau. Michael is a career Foreign Service officer with more than 30 years of experience in international development policy. He has worked throughout Latin America during his time at USAID and is an expert on environmental management, rule of law, and citizen engagement. Michael, thank you for joining us. Our second panelist is Dr. Francisco Dahlmeier, Director at the Center for Conservation and Sustainability at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. Dr. Dahlmeier has over 30 years of experience integrating conservation needs with development priorities to sustain biodiversity in Latin America. He has ample experience designing and implementing biodiversity conservation strategies in sensitive areas of the Amazon and other important tropical ecosystems worldwide. Our third panelist is Christina Vollmer Bourelli, founder and director of the V5 Initiative, and a senior associate with the Americas Program at CSIS. Ms. Bourelli has over 20 years of experience working with nonprofits, including as a founder of the V5 Initiative, a nonprofit that leads and supports broad initiatives that promote better and more informed policymaking and governance at the national and international level. She also started SOS Orinoco, an advocacy group that is shedding light on the environmental situation in the Amazonas and Orinoco regions of Venezuela. Our fourth panelist today is Dr. Eduardo Klein Salas, Associate Professor of Environmental Studies at Simón Bolívar University in Venezuela. Dr. Klein Salas is a leading researcher in marine ecology and biodiversity, and also leads the Remote Sensing and Geospatial Analysis Laboratory at the Institute of Technology and Marine Science. He joins us from Australia, where he is carrying out a project on bleaching patterns and prediction tools for the Great Barrier Reef. Good morning, Eduardo. Our panelists today will frame the conversation by discussing the impacts of environmental degradation throughout various sectors of Venezuelan society, and by making recommendations for government and civil society actors to shine a spotlight on these issues. Mr. Michael Eddy, over to you for your keynote remarks.
Thank you, Ryan, and greetings, everyone. Thanks to our esteemed panelists, to our host, CSIS, and most importantly, all of you who have joined us for this very important discussion on the state of the environment in Venezuela. As mentioned, I'm Michael Eddy, Deputy Assistant Administrator for South American Affairs at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And as we at USAID prepare to roll out our new climate change strategy and other key initiatives that will be launched at the COP26 summit in Glasgow next week, environmental degradation in Venezuela and the state of the Amazon environment in general is something that we are particularly passionate about. And again, I thank all of our panelists for being here and helping us to raise awareness. As a little background, I served as our USAID mission director in Brazil for from 2015 to 19. And in Brazil, one of our deepest partnerships between the United States and Brazil over a 60-year relationship is our partnership for the conservation of biodiversity in the Amazon. A part of that relationship over the years has been working together to coordinate on the management of Brazil's vast protected areas system, which it covers more than 2.2 million square kilometers. It's the size, almost the size of the country of Mexico. And over the decades, we've harmonized and really learned from each other of how the U.S. and Brazil manage our protected areas system. And I mentioned that foundational relationship because over the decades of that relationship, we worked with a lot of the communities, the some 25 million human beings that are living in the legal Amazon. And we came to learn that for those communities who want to conserve the forests, for them to be able to have success, but to also be able to sustain their families and feed themselves, we need a sustainable economic model for Amazon communities. So that really became the core of USAID's business model, USAID's focus in Brazil. In recent years, we've helped work together with Brazil to develop the world's first biodiversity impact fund. This is leveraging in private capital to help sustainable enterprises that have a discernible and measurable impact, a positive impact on biodiversity conservation. We stood up and partnered to create the partnership platform for the Amazon, the PPA, which helped to incubate these businesses and help making sure that they would be successful. We worked with partners like NASA through Servir Amazonia to bring cutting edge technology, satellite imagery, other tools, so that policymakers could monitor the Amazon and make good policy decisions. And just earlier today, I was in a meeting with the consortium of Amazon state governors, where they rolled out their green recovery plan that does bring in a lot of these concepts of good governance, of inclusion of communities, of sustainable and smart investment to environmental sustainability. And I mention all of these examples because, while things are not perfect in Brazil, we are learning and seeing that it takes all of these matters to sustain the environment. It takes good governance. It takes respect for human rights, particularly indigenous rights and inclusion. And when we flip across the border and look at the record of the Maduro regime, unfortunately, we don't see any of those things. And we see what the confluence of failed economic policies, a complete lack of governance, abuse of human rights, abuse of indigenous rights, and regional insecurity, when they intersect, they lead to create the disaster, the environmental disaster that we see today. Ryan touched on this, but let's start with the oil industry. You know, from 2010 to 2016, Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, was responsible for, as Ryan mentioned, upwards of 50,000 separate crude oil spills. And again, I had to double take, that's not 50,000 gallons, that's 50,000 separate incidents. Most of these spills could have been avoided. And again, they're due to the infrastructure deterioration, but really a failure of governance, of mismanagement and corruption. So as with oil revenues dwindling in 2010, the regime of Nicolas Maduro appropriated 12% of the Venezuelan Amazon as the mining development region, otherwise known as the Arco Minero. This region is a unique rainforest ecosystem. It's rich in biodiversity, and within its borders lie the Canaima National Park, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and protected areas that are home to 27 unique indigenous communities. This area also happens to be very rich in coltan, iron, and most critical to the regime, and they're trying to sustain themselves to gold. Environmental watchdogs that we're going to hear from today have detected dozens of new illegal mining clusters in the Arco Minero since 2016. Indigenous communities in this region are facing the brunt of illegal mining. In addition to destroying their ancestral lands, they are often exposed to mercury contamination, forced labor, sexual exploitation at the hands of these illegal operations. And one of my other roles was as our US government representative to the Venezuelan migration crisis and refugee crisis in Brazil, and spending a lot of time at that border. Unfortunately, we saw and ended up taking in and helping the Brazilians through their Operation Welcome, take in thousands and thousands of indigenous peoples from the Bolivar state and from Amazonas state, many who were violently evicted from their ancestral lands, many shot, many with bullet wounds, many emergencies that at the hands of this regime and of these circumstances. So these predatory practices allow for the expansion and enrichment of non-state armed groups that have taken over and now govern these territories, and they lead to the greater environmental degradation of the Amazon. The regime's negligence not only impacts the environment of indigenous communities in Venezuela, but has huge, discernible, measurable impacts on neighboring countries, Brazil, Guyana, Colombia, and the Caribbean Basin and their tropical forests. Sadly, those who try to speak out against these illegal activities or conduct research on this issue are silenced. And I think we're going to hear from representatives of some of those very, very brave and heroic groups that are trying to shine a light and have firsthand information about this. Not only has the Maduro regime cut off funding for research centers and universities looking into environmental issues, but the researchers themselves face substantial threats from the regime for reporting on these environmental circumstances. So there's an increasing need for all of us, for the international community to draw attention and for international stakeholders and decision makers to recognize what the Maduro regime's record of environmental degradation. In line with President Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, which was issued this year, USAID is supporting responsible management of the Amazon region, including conservation of biodiversity and protection of the rights of indigenous people. Raising awareness about the environmental challenges in Venezuela and along its coastlines must be a concerted effort by stakeholders throughout South America and around the globe and throughout the international community. So we call on the international community to make sure that environmental degradation by the Maduro regime is included in regional and global discussions of climate change. As Ryan referenced, the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, happening next month, is one such opportunity for the international actors, for the UN system, for all of us to step forward, join this effort, and raise awareness about what is happening. The alternative, which would be further destruction of the Amazon with far-reaching public health, biodiversity and climate change implications simply cannot stand. It is not acceptable. We got to work together to address this. So thank you all for being here. You are part of the solution. We appreciate that, and I look forward to the rich conversation that we're going to have moving forward. Thanks again to CSIS for pulling this together. Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Michael, for those opening remarks and that call to action. I want to give the floor to Francisco Dahlmeier for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of the experiences that we are having in the region. I wanted to give you some background on why Venezuela is so important for the issues we are facing in environmental degradation. The social issues and the economic issues is what we hear on the paper every day. The environmental issues are pretty much part of the equation, and they have to be worked out together. We are facing this climate change meeting. All the nations are going to get together to figure it out, what we can do, and the next step of action. In this particular case, Venezuela cannot be left behind. So if I can have the first slide, please, to give you some context of where we are. Venezuela, as you know, is located in the northern part of South America and is within the Amazon basin. It's within the Amazon Pan-Amazonian region. This region is extremely important because the amount of biodiversity it contains, but it's not really a unified platform. You have the northern Amazon, that is when Venezuela and the Guyanas are located. We have the southern part of the Amazon with the Brazil and the consolidated development areas. You have the Andean Amazon, and you have the Amazon River, basically the way for transportation and the way for development in that region too. So in the next slide, why do we talk about Venezuela within the Guyana context? Well, because we have the northern part of South America is the oldest part. This region of Guyana, including the countries of Suriname, French Guyana, and British Guyana. We have Venezuela, the portion that we call the Guyana in Venezuela that is also linked to the Amazon. This portion is important because it's within the Amazon ecosystem. Even some of the rivers flow into the Atlantic, but the other half of the rivers go basically to the Amazon. Why is this important? Because it's 1.7 billion years old region, tremendous amount of genetic diversity, 18% of the water resources of the world, very high biodiversity, almost 20% of the carbon of forest carbon that we have in the world is concentrated in this region. And because the topography and geography, we have the amount of species diversity, hotspot, genetic diversity are in this area. In the next picture, in the next slide, please. Here we have the topography. This is what makes Venezuela so unique and ecologically, biologically, in terms of ecosystem services, and in terms of supporting the economic and the social aspect of the country to be successful. In the southern part, you have, as I mentioned, part of the Guyana Shield, part of the connection of the neighboring countries, but also with the highest biodiversity and reaches is located. In the northern part, you have the coastal area, the Andean Cordillera to the left that is coming, and you have the Maracaibo Lake. The Maracaibo Lake in the north west of the country is the largest lake in South America. Tremendous amount of diversity, endemismo, a lot of the water flow into that direction, and it's also sitting in one of the largest oil reserves for the country. In the central part of the country, you have the oil reserve north of the Orinoco River, major ones that have been developed and explored in many different ways, and which are creating several fronts of contamination, not only for the central portion, but also for the coastal marine environments that, as you know, are placed in the Caribbean and in areas of high biodiversity sensitivity. In the next image, you can see the Guyana Shield. This is where the Arco Minero, this development front is being opened at very high speed. We have from the northern part of the Arco Minero, we have a portion of development that's moving south. from the south is moving north, and I will show you that in a few slides. You can see the topographic areas of the center overlapping with Venezuela, where the highest importance of conservation biodiversity is located, and with many indigenous communities, territories are also located, which are being affected by the policies of the government and the unsustainable practices for the natural resources. In the next slide. In the next slide, I was going to show you the basically the geography of deterioration. Then you can see in the orange, in the northern part of the graphics, you can see this front of a gold rush frontier. Okay, it's coming from the consolidated aspect green areas, a light green. It's coming south. So it's basically the policies of the Arco Minero moving in a way in a very high front. When you can see the colors of the kind of light orange colors of that region in comparison to the entire Amazon region, it's a mega area that not only includes Venezuela but the neighboring countries. So this is moving south, in moving toward the protected areas, to the great regions of Venezuela. And then in the next picture, you can see. If you pass the next slide, Isaac, please. You can see basically how this not only affects the ecological integrity of the place, but also the hydrological system. One of the most important hydrological components for the entire Amazon region, you have each one of those black spots that you can see in the Venezuelan area and the Guyanas are illegal mining. Mining operating in small operations, virtually every one of those mining operations is basically non-sustainable, is totally contaminating, using mercury, sedimentation, and is creating a major issue for the hydrological system. Each one of the blue points that you see in the entire Amazon basin, there are hydrological potential for hydropower or areas that have been already developed. You have the Guri reservoir, and you have many other reservoirs that are extremely important for the country, but also for the region, that are being and suffering from high sedimentation, pollution that will be last for many generations with mercury, and basically uncontrollable management of the environmental catastrophe that is occurring in those regions. So these fronts are moving in a high pace. The idea is to consolidate these new fronts into major areas of development in a non-sustainable way, which is totally unacceptable for what society is asking today. Let's work in a sustainable development approach for conservation and development. In the next slide. So the importance of this region was understood many years ago. Venezuela made a significant effort in consolidating protected areas. All the areas that you see here in different categories of green and other colors are basically categories of protected areas. You have the lighter green national parks, the darker one, national monuments, and the southern part of Venezuela, because the affiliation with Guyana, because the affiliation with the great demand for natural resources conservation and protection, for the integrity and the sustainability of the region, were designed in this particular way. Together with these categories of protection and the indigenous communities, really reach a cultural and biological region that is now being totally transformed in a very fast pace by illegal operations, by illegal mining development, that over time, if it's not addressed timely, this could be a major disaster, not only for the region, but for the world. So with that, I would like to thank you the opportunity to be here to discuss some of the issues, and hopefully we can move it to the next level with the COP26. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vollmer, for those comments and for your wonderful slides. Christina Bourelli, over to you for your opening presentation.
Thank you, Ryan. And please excuse my voice. I lost it. I think I'm almost there, but if I'm a little hoarse, bear with me. So Venezuela's environmental crisis is inherently tied to its political situation. The Maduro regime is increasingly protecting itself from mounting international pressure at the expense of Venezuela's natural resources and pristine biodiversity. And without a negotiated solution or change in government, the regime will likely continue to irreversibly damage the environment, silence environmental activists and indigenous communities, and by relinquishing its national sovereignty to Colombian guerrilla groups and other foreign state and non-state actors, it's ultimately threatening the entire hemispheric security. So if we could see the first slide, and while I talk, these are just a few key data points, just to remind everyone the most important data points here. So SOS Orinoco has published 17 in-depth reports in Spanish and 10 in English. They're all on our website. And they all focus on the situation in southern Venezuela. And our conclusion is that the Orinoco mining arc is not simply a geographical area, as the Maduro regime would have us think, and as they illegally decreed. It goes well beyond the limits of this area, and it's become a criminal mining policy, an official criminal mining policy. Next slide. SOS Orinoco has been, since 2018, has been mapping the footprint of the mines in southern Venezuela. And you can go to the next slide. And this, we believe that this places Venezuela at the top of the list of Amazonian countries with the highest number of illegal mines. So with high resolution satellite images, SOS Orinoco has been mapping this, and you can see all the little red dots or red splotches on this map. Those are mines. And to date, we have mapped almost 90,000 hectares in about 900 mining clusters. And this number is on the rise. And this also includes 59 illegal gold mining clusters within UNESCO's Canaima World Heritage Site. So you can see that sort of on the left, that's Canaima World Heritage Site. All of this, so all of these red dots that you can see here, which are the illegal mines, are within protected areas and are the habitat to 27 indigenous people. Next slide. One of the more disturbing aspects of this mining situation is the explosion of the malaria epidemic. In this next slide, you will see how we've, can we see? Okay, there we go. So there's a map of malaria in southern Venezuela. So disease plagues the mining areas and indigenous communities, and 53% of reported malaria cases in Latin America are in Venezuela. Of 398,000 reported new cases in 2019, 70% were in southern Venezuela in the mining areas. This malaria epidemic doesn't stay within the borders of Venezuela, because we're starting to see malaria. I mean, for the past few years, we've seen malaria all over South America being imported by Venezuelan migrants. Next slide. So I'm just going very quickly over the key issues and impact of this mining policy. So the next slide shows kind of the overlap of violent armed groups and military units. Okay, in these maps, you can see the mining sites, which are the little red dots, the little black dots, and the yellow circles, whatever, are areas of violence inside the mining arc. So mining sites are exploited by state and non-state groups, including the Colombian ELN and FARC dissident, who are all promoting violence, slave labor, child labor, prostitution, and most importantly, the disintegration of indigenous social structures. And this slide shows the overlap in the largest mining sectors of the Orinoco mining arc of armed groups and military units. This is particularly alarming because you can clearly see a connection between the armed groups, military units, and mining, indicating that they're all inextricably linked. In the next slide, I'm going to just kind of zoom in on the case of Yapacana National Park. So mines in southern Venezuela have been controlled by violent Venezuelan gangs, as we know. But more recently, the Maduro regime has tried to take control of these mines. And they have outsourced to the Maduro regime has outsourced to the Colombian guerrilla the retaking of control of these mines. And this is the case of Yapacana on the border of Colombia, which has become a bastion of the Colombian guerrilla and one of the key sources of funding for operations as they launder drug money through illegal mining. And the satellite image on the right shows how these people are even mining on top of one of these tabletop mountains. And that requires logistical help from the Venezuelan armed forces, because the only way that you can get up onto that tepuy is with a helicopter. Next slide. So just to conclude, I want to say that by exposing this environmental disaster in southern Venezuela, SOS Orinoco just wants to make it harder to mine, to process, transport gold, to smuggle illegal mercury into Venezuela. And on the demand side, you can show the next slide. The objective is to disrupt and shine light on supply chains and make buyers less willing to buy Venezuelan gold. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Christina, for that excellent presentation. And I think it's clear after that presentation that not only can we not disentangle the environmental policies from the political situation, but also how this all intersects with the regime's criminality. Very, very good presentation. Dr. Eduardo Klein Salas is with us as well. Your opening presentation, Dr. Klein Salas, and thank you once again for joining us on your Tuesday morning.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you very much, CSIS, to setting up this event to raise awareness of what is happening in Venezuela. I would like to show you some images about what I'm doing to monitoring the oil spill in the west coast of Venezuela. If we can have the first slide, please. I've been looking at the satellite images for a long time, and this first image will show you what happened last year during July. This one, the black line you see in the middle of the slide, you can see in the left, this peninsula is in Maracaibo National Park, which is a national park with the key marine ecosystem, mangrove, coral reef, seagrasses, etc. And this is a huge oil spill coming into the Gulf of Triste, which is this part, it's the central west coast of Venezuela. Can I have the next one, please? And this is one of the most striking images I ever seen after looking at the satellite images all around the coast of Venezuela. Next one, please. So this is what I call the black years for the marine environment. This particular oil spill came from the El Palito oil refinery, which is at the bottom of the slide. And there is a distance of 50 kilometers from the El Palito refinery to the national park. This huge oil spill, and we are talking about 55 kilometers long, the area of the oil will cover capital city Caracas 2.5 times. So you can imagine what will happen to a national park if that oil slick arrives to the park. Fortunately, in this particular moment, only the left part of the spill reached the national park. And it was not a tragedy, but it could be a tragedy. So I'll try to show you that the last 3 recent events of the Palito refinery, another event in the west coast of Venezuela, the Lake Maracaibo, and how a very slow or no action from the Venezuelan oil industry, PDVSA, was shown in the images. Next one, please. So During this particular event in July, the government tried to avoid the responsibility of the oil spill. They tried to diverge the public opinion, saying that the oil spill we saw in the previous slide was caused by a spill from a vessel, from a tanker. But these images, the left one is in 19th of July. So you will see in the bottom the El Palito refiner with the terminals. And 2 days after, you will see the huge oil spill. And this is about 20,000 to 26,000 barrels of crude oil. This spill is almost 2 times bigger than the one occurred in Mauritius Island 2 weeks after. So this is a major spill, and this is unequivocal evidence that the oil came from the oil refinery. So next, please. So they were trying to avoid the responsibility. So far, 1 year after, it has been no recognition from the oil industry that actually a spill happened in the El Palito refinery. Please, the next one. And then I ran some models and look at the images, and there is no doubt that actually the oil came from the crude oil came from the refinery, and even the social media, the news reported an accident the same day and reports that several plants has to be stopped and paralyzed because of leakage or something like that. So when a plant fails, all the products that are inside the plants, the crude oil, have to be delivered to these lagoons. You will see the lagoons, the black lagoons in the image on the right, and those lagoons were already collapsed. So when you put more oil, more crude oil, just spill over. And then the spillover goes directly to the sea. And next one, please. And that's happened 3 times last year, when in July, then in August, and then in November. In the next slide, you can see that this is not a unique event. Going back with satellite images, you will see oil spills in July 2019, in September 2019. This one in September 2019 was, I think it's bigger than the one we had the last year. But fortunately, I mean, for the national park and the currents just drive away the spill out of the coast. So few people really know about what's happening in the refinery. So next slide, please. And this is a common issue in El Palito refinery. I want to talk to another place in Venezuela, which is the west coast. It's Paraguana Peninsula in Gulf of Venezuela. You will see the peninsula in the top left. You have Colombia on the left, and you have Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire on the top. And in Paraguana Peninsula exists 2 main oil refineries, Amuay refinery and Candor refinery. Together, some time ago, they were the largest refinery complex in the world, with a capacity of processing of more than 1 million barrels of crude oil per day. So what's the main hub of oil production in Venezuela? Those are old installations, mostly 50 years old as well. And it receives the crude oil by tankers, and you can see the tankers as white small dots anchored in front of the refinery and white, and by pipelines that cross what we call the Golfete de Coro through Punta Caiman, and the recent one, Punta Maragüey. So if we can have the next one, please. And this refinery has been leaking oil and hydrocarbons since long time ago. In the next one, you will see a leak coming from the pipeline that cross Punta Maragüey. And this is a pipeline, of all the pipeline, this is the most recent one. So we'll see in this image as it occurs a leakage, and you will see the white spot here is a bubbling of the gas because it's a polyduct, and then it sometimes carry light condensate of hydrocarbons. So you can see the leak here, and the leak reached the Punta Maragüey, which is a very important area for migratory birds, and there are some mangrove forests and coastal crocodile habitats in that particular area. The next one, please. But this particular pipeline has been broken 6 times in the last 14 months. Every time I was able to look at the images and see the spot in different places of the pipeline. The next one, please. So the other problem is that the refinery is continuously discharging industrial waters into the Gulf of Venezuela. And you will see the huge and very large smoke here from the burners that indicates that the refinery is working, and they are burning the products that they are not able to produce or to process. And you will see the oil slick coming from the industrial wastewater coming out, and you will see the same signal in the radar image. Next one. And this is very common. Every time you look at the Cardón refinery, you will see that they are more or less discharging different amounts of oil that depending on the activities in the refinery, the slick can go as far as 60 kilometers offshore. The next one, please. This is a process that occurs in the Cardón refinery, but also in the Amuay refinery, which is in the north. But with the difference that the Amuay refinery is inside a bay, and the bay contains all the hydrocarbon and sludge they are discharging, unless the discharge is so high that can reach out of the bay. The next one, please. We are having a problem with the slides. So I want to show you that this is not, okay, here you go, a mosaic of different images in 2020 and 2021, and you will see the signature of with the radar images, the signature of the oil slick, and you will see in the north, in the image in the right, bottom right, you will see how in this particular date, the wastewater from the Amuay refinery went out of the Amuay Bay, reaching the ocean. Next one, please. So this is a continuous problem. It has been there for decades. The difference that before the 2010, the industry really contains and controls the amounts of products, hydrocarbons they discharge into the sea. The next one, please. Another area I want to just to very quick show you is this one. And this image, this green image, is not a photo of a distant galaxy taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. It's a huge algal bloom in the Maracaibo Lake. The next one, please. Maracaibo Lake is a very eutrophic system. It's a semi-enclosed area, it's in an estuary, and it is one of the most important areas for production of oil in Venezuela. It contains more than 10,000 kilometers of underwater pipelines, overlapped one on top of another, like an spaghetti plate, and thousands of offshore installations and thousands of installations nearby the coast. The next one, please. So the already eutrophic lake has been affected by the agricultural runoff with pesticides and fertilizers, also by the urban wastewater runoff that flow freely into the lake, and also by the slicks of the oil industry. The next one, please. So here in these images, while we wait for the next one, okay, this is the Maracaibo Lake, and this is an image from NASA that you can see the huge algal bloom occurred just a few weeks ago. And in the right and the radar image, you will see that all the white dots are offshore oil installations in the east coast of the lake. Next one, please. So if you look at very detailed image, you will see that most of the installation are always leaking oil. This one is a flux station nearby Bachaquero, the east coast, and you will see how this particular point, you see the origin of the slick, and this particular station has been leaking for more than 2 weeks right now. If you see an image today, you will see the station leaking, and you will also see that the oil slick will circulate all around the lake, and you will see that sometimes there are multiple sources, like in the one in the image in the left side, and this is a very common processing in Venezuela. So the next one, please. So Lake Maracaibo is a complete separate case of study. So what to expect? I mean, looking at the images, you will see that there's no capacity of the industry to prevent or clean the oil spill, any oil spills. The oil spills are running for weeks. The oil spill from the underwater pipelines took, in average, 2 months to close. And on the case in the Palito refinery, nobody actually took anything at the side of the refinery, just try to collect the oil spill on the beaches. So there has been no official statement. This is another thing. Nobody recognized, the industry doesn't recognize that they are producing the oil spills. There is an old infrastructure. Most of the oil infrastructure in Venezuela is quite old, some of them more than 50 years old. And if you add this to lack of maintenance, the consequence is oil spills. Any oil installation will acknowledge this kind of equation. And the other thing, which is more important, is there is a lack of action, which is happening right now. The long-term effects on the marine environment will be huge. And this is my last statement. So what we need is to implement some kind of action and raise awareness of the people that this is a problem that is taking place in Venezuela in all the marine environment, and it's so much damage doing to the environment that the lack of action just produce a long-term effect of marine environment. Thank you very much. Go back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klein Salas, for those slides. Truly harrowing stuff. An oil slick that would cover Caracas twice over. It's so long. Really devastating stuff to hear. I want to move into the moderated portion of our discussion, but I also, before I do that, I want to remind our viewers that there is an option to ask live questions for the end of our session, where we'll get to a Q&A. And to do that, you can click on our website, Ask Live Questions button at the bottom of the web page and type your question in, and we'll try to get to it at the end of this event. We've heard from Christina, we've heard from others that there are likely not to be major changes in Venezuela's policies absent a change in government. But I want to talk about what we can do as the United States, as the international community, as civil society. I want to ask all of you to comment on what can we do if the Maduro regime remains in power in the foreseeable future, which I think, unfortunately, many of us would agree is likely to happen. What can we do to better the situation in terms of the environment on the ground? Where can we make changes around the edges? Where can we make impact as impactful progress as we can? Because I don't want to leave viewers with the impression that all hope is lost, right? So I want to talk about policy solutions that the US, the international community, NGO groups, civil society can pursue to affect the regime's environmental policies and to make a real impact on the ground. And I'll ask Christina to start us, and then I'll go to Dr. Vollmer and Dr. Klein Salas. And Michael, feel free if you'd like to comment as well. We can come to you as well. Thank you. Christina, you first.
Yeah, great question. I think we absolutely need to continue an effort of cooperation with Venezuela's neighbors, in particular Colombia and Brazil. We're already seeing some very interesting resolutions, studies. The OECD just published a report on Venezuelan gold flows just about a month ago. And this is really compelling stuff, because all OECD members have to take note of the fact that Venezuelan gold, according to this report, is in its entirety illicit. And it may even be funding international terrorism. So all OECD members have to take note. And I was in Geneva last week, and I saw some very interesting news that Switzerland, which is the world's largest gold refiner, even though they don't produce gold, put out an alert regarding gold coming in from the United Arab Emirates, because gold coming from the Emirates is tainted. And this is gold coming from Africa, from Venezuela, and so on. There have also been two resolutions, a bipartisan resolution by the US Congress, by the Senate, regarding illegal gold in Venezuela. That is a very strong signal. Last week in the Spanish Parliament, there was also a resolution So the world is taking note, okay? People are, even though the large environmental groups aren't making a big fuss about this, governments are. So I think that's really, really important. And we need to continue in that vein.
Thank you, Christina. Super important, I think, to keep that in mind is how we can work to affect change, even if the Maduro regime remains in power. Francisco Dalmayer, Dr. Dalmayer, I want to go to you. What do you think we can do, assuming that the Maduro regime remains in power, to better the situation? Dr. Dalmayer, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Obviously, from inside the government or this administration, there is very few reports on the issues that are happening. We have basically major attack on the coastal marine environments. The pollution is going on a scale that we've never seen before. It's not just the coast of Venezuela, the coastal areas of Venezuela that has been affected. It's the Caribbean, it's the fishery industry, locally and internationally. At the same time, you are doing the same in the south and other portions of the country with the rainforest and the Guyana Shield and the illegal gold. So anyway, a diagnostic is essential to be able to proceed with understanding exactly what's happening. There are enough resources, enough professionals inside and outside Venezuela. We have enough information from satellite images and other kind of information to understand exactly what's happening and the scale that was happening. Then, as Christina was mentioning, is working with the regional governments and international community. This has to stop. The scale of this, it cannot be continued the way it is. I mean, it's not just not sustainable. It's kind of an ecocide, that is occurring in the region. And it's going to be a moon-like environment that's going to be left behind. And it's impossible to support people and societies on that kind of unsustainable practices. So yes, the meetings at the COP are necessary. International community have to take into consideration the catastrophic impact of what's happening there, and the way it's going on business as usual. This is kind of the new way to do things. So yeah, I think a pressure from outside, but it has to be a coordinated effort for scientists from a number of organizations to determine exactly what's happening and the different categories of priorities to be able to address the issue, maybe with international pressure, maybe engaging the government in a different way to participate in this process of reconciliation with the environment. So these are the basis for societal support and also economic support for the country.
Thank you, Francisco. Dr. Klein Salas, what can we do, and what can NGOs, international community, the US, what can we do to better the situation on the ground?
Yeah, I think one of the first things we need to do, or you need to do, or everybody needs to do, is to raise awareness. One of the worries is that all these oil spills has been, very lightly taken. Apparently, is something like in the international world say, okay, this is another problem of the poor country of Venezuela. This is another one. I mean, there is a human rights violation. There are protests. There are political prisoners. Whatever. This is one of the problems. But it's not like this. I mean, this is a very long-term effect we'll have. So raise awareness is the first things I think we need to do in the international fora. Venezuela is signatory of many conventions, like Convention for Biological Diversity, MARPOL, Cartagena Convention that deals with marine pollution, etc., etc. So we need to rise and contact those people to make pressure from the outside. Unfortunately, the oil industry is under control of the government. It's very few that we can, very little that we can do there, and the government normally use some kind of partnership with those oil industry that they don't have this green image like the big a transnational or well-known company like Shell, Chevron, whatever, they deal with Russians, Vietnam, and some dark oil industries that really they don't care about the environment. So this is another thing. And the third thing, you need to support the local communities. The local communities has been doing an important role in cleaning and maintaining the environment and denouncing the aspect of the oil spill, the effects, and they are suffering. I mean, they are the one that's suffering, not only the fishermen, but the tourist operation. I mean, the local people is suffering the oil slick, and they are the ones that actually collect and clean their beaches, and they actually denounce that. So I think that you need to support the local communities and also the researchers, because the researchers are the ones that are capable to measure the real impact of the oil slicks and the oil degradation in the environment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klein, Salas. Michael, Eddy, would you like to chime in here on what can we be doing as a U.S. government, as the international community, to better the situation on the ground?
Thank you. Well, just complimentary to the excellent responses from the panelists. The raising awareness, obviously, that is something that's a bit general, but there are very specific measures we can take, and I do kind of encourage people to use, whether it's through your congressional representatives, through whatever sources you have, NGOs that you may be working with, to raise awareness. I very much like Christina's suggestion, that, and believe me, in Brazil, we were working very closely to try to get the Brazilian government to take a more forward-leaning, very specific and stance, because it is their environment being impacted, their peoples being impacted. And I guess, the specificity of awareness raising is something, maybe I'll give an example. So as Christina mentioned, all the gold coming out of Venezuela is illegal. It may be funding terrorism, likely funding terrorism. There are only certain places where the gold refining union of the world refine gold, and where that to a standard that meets the gold standard and has the global price level. So those countries that participate in that union, we need to call out the fact that you need to know your source. So I do know that, for example, Turkey is instrumental in this, and we were through our bilateral diplomacy and also through NATO, through the European Union, we're saying, look, this is where this gold comes from. If it's coming into your refineries, then you are potentially, committing a crime. So try not only, raising awareness, but being, where possible, specific about who are the other private actors who are benefiting economically from trade. We know that there were some along the borders, of course, who trade and transit in illegal gold, but also international actors. We need to call those out when we have the opportunity to be specific and raise awareness along the specific lines of what's transpiring there.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your response. We're getting a lot of really good questions coming in the Ask Live Questions function. And I think it's probably safe to say it's 4:57 right now. We're going to go over a few minutes here to ask some of these very great questions that have come in through the Ask Live Questions feature. So bear with me as we work through some of these, because they're really excellent questions, and I want to get to as many of them as we possibly can. Let's start out with one that's quite, I might even say, provocative, and it's about the responsibility to protect. And the question is, does the international community's responsibility to protect extend and apply beyond human rights to the situation of environmental rights? Does anyone want to take that question on R2P?
I'll just say that, as I tried to explain in my very short presentation, that human rights and environmental rights and the ecocide that's taking place in southern Venezuela are inextricably linked. And I think that the countries and the people who are concerned for Venezuela and for a democratic outcome in Venezuela need to understand that the threats to security in Venezuela and the surrounding countries, the threats to Venezuelan people, cannot be understood or confronted without considering the role of minerals and the fragile environment. We have to look at this in a sort of transversal way. The environment is affecting all of the Venezuelan crisis, shall we say.
And so it's impossible to disconnect environmental rights from human rights. And so is that for you encapsulated by R2P?
I believe so. I'm not a specialist in R2P, but in as far as we're talking about human rights, I can, from the perspective of Southern Venezuela and environmental rights, they're inextricably linked.
Thank you, Christina. We've got another question that's come in about development and balancing the Venezuelan environmental concerns with sustainable development. And the question is, how can the government of Venezuela balance these complex environmental issues with other issues facing the country, such as poverty and significant food insecurity? I think that's a really great question. And I want to give Michael Eddy, as well as Dr. Klein Salas and Dr. Vollmer a chance to answer as well if they'd like. But Michael, do you have anything to say on this?
Well, it started from at least my remarks from our observation that the illegitimate Maduro regime has sort of de facto given up on trying to address these sorts of balances and has given up on governing and governance and is not addressing food insecurity or public health issues within the country, and really is only doing whatever steps are necessary for personal and individual and crony survival. So with the interim government of Venezuela, who we recognize and support, the democratically elected National Assembly and the interim government led by interim President Juan Guaido, we've tried to work with these issues. We do have a partnership through our Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance with the World Food Program that are, so outside actors are we had to be negotiated, so are engaging, and the U.S. government has been by far the most generous in addressing food insecurity for the 7.5 million Venezuelans inside the country that need immediate assistance, and the 6 million who have fled the country who also need humanitarian assistance. The total package of commitment is $1.9 billion US dollars to those populations, mainly across food security, also socioeconomic integration for those who have had to flee, but also trying to provide basic access to public health, despite the obstacle that the Maduro regime and the colectivos and the kind of non-governing mafias who in many cases present an obstacle to providing basic food security or basic health services, basic education services. So that balance, unfortunately, has been sort of abandoned by the illegitimate regime, but it is something that we as development professionals to continue to work towards trying to mitigate the worst impacts of the implosion and the lack of governance, and try to address that balance that the participant pointed out.
Great, thank you, Michael. Anything to add to that, Francisco or Eduardo?
Yes, I would like to add a second, my colleagues. The process is not sustainable at the moment. And the migration that you see and the people below the poverty level, subsistence living, is basically because natural resources and management has been disjuncted, So we have to address the sustainability issue. The path that Venezuela is taking now is very aggressive towards insustainability. More and more, a larger portion of the population is going to end in the same situation that we already have for many years now. So it has to be addressed in a different way. A new framework, a more international cooperation framework, revert that process. We have to revert that process because, again, the environmental component that has been less a voice in the international community is what is going to support the population in the future. The systems are broken. and it has to be a new approach to basically to address that issue.
Thank you, Francisco. Eduardo, anything to add?
Yes, actually, I would like to answer the question about the balance that the government maintains between the social and there is not such a balance. There is non-existent. There is no, the problem is so complex and it is very difficult to isolate, as Christina mentioned, the environmental problem from the other problems in the Venezuela. So to give you an example, for example, when I report an oil spill in the Maracaibo Lake, how do you expect the people in Valencia, which is 800 kilometers away, where they need to make lines 10 hours, maybe 1 day hour, trying to find fuel for their cars, trying to find food. They are dealing with power outage. They are dealing with no internet connection. So it's like, okay, this is a bad problem. This is an oil spill over there. But I have a huge amount of different problems. So it is very, very complex. It's not the way to analyze only the environment. We need to analyze in a whole sense of the whole country. And unfortunately, the balance that it should be managed, it should be managed by the government is totally non-existent. It's totally non-existent. So my message is the problem is extremely complex.
Thank you, Eduardo. We have a question that's come in that I think I've discussed with a couple of the panelists before in a different forum, but it's about why we don't hear so much about Venezuela's environmental degradation from the international community, from NGOs that follow this stuff. We hear a lot about Brazil. We anticipate that we'll hear a lot about Brazil at the COP26. Jair Bolsonaro and Hamilton Mourão, the president and vice president of Brazil, do not plan on attending COP26, as far as I'm aware, nor are there any members of the Maduro regime who are planning on attending COP26, if I'm not mistaken. So are we going to hear about Venezuela to a significant degree at COP26? And why haven't we heard about Venezuela and the environmental degradation up to this point? We've got a good question there about why international NGOs and other environmental groups are very focused on Brazil and on other countries that are not up to environmental standards, but not Venezuela. Why does Venezuela seem to get a pass here? And I'll give you all a chance to answer very quickly. And then there are a couple other questions, maybe one or two more before we close, that I'd like to get to. Michael, I'd like to start with you if you'd like to say anything about it.
Well, I'll be very brief because I want to hear from these esteemed panelists. But I think that there is definitely a factor that the Brazil, the Amazon, given that it is, by far and away the largest tropical rainforests remaining on the planet, all other tropical rainforests can fit within that biome, and the fact that the majority of it is in Brazil, this kind of calls the imagination for those non-environmentalists or non-specialists. It's still sort of synonymous with we need to do something to address climate change, the lungs of the world. So there is that attention that it gets beyond the think tanks and the academic community. I cannot answer whether we're going to get the resonance we would like. This effort today that USAID is supporting, and we thank you all again for participating, is part to address that imbalance. It is something that we've observed, and we are working hard to try to ensure that these realities are understood and their broader regional impact and really global impact are understood. So it is something we're committed to. I agree with the spirit of the question, and we're doing all we can to address it. Thanks, Ryan.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And indeed, that was the sort of thrust behind our project and our collaboration with USAID throughout, was to highlight this issue in Venezuela's political, social, and economic crisis. Others who would like to chime in here? I know, Christina, we've talked about this in other fora before, and so I want to give you a chance to comment.
Yeah, I think it's two main reasons. One, Venezuela never pitched itself as an Amazonian country. We were always, the oil country. We were always, facing north with our backs to the south, looking at the Caribbean, et cetera. And so even within Venezuela, we never really pitched ourselves as an Amazonian country. And I think that's, on the one hand, it allowed governments during the 20th century to protect large swaths of the country because there wasn't really much interest in that part of the country. And that's good. But now when it needs protecting and when we need to denounce, even within Venezuela, people don't really know what's going on. So we really need to educate not only Venezuelans, but also the international community about the importance of Venezuela as an Amazon country. And then the other piece is that Chavez and then Maduro were really good at monopolizing the discourse on pro-environmental and pro-indigenous topics for 20 years. And they were out there saying that they were the most pro-indigenous and the most pro-environment, and nobody really checked to see if that was true. And so now things hopefully are going to change.
Great, thanks, Christina. You reminded me of the treatises that I've come across in researching some of this on eco-socialism and other things. There were actually conferences and a bunch of material produced by both the Chavez and the Maduro regimes about this stuff. And so it's quite interesting, the point that you make, that some people may not have checked any further. Dr. Dahlmeier, Dr. Klein, Salas, any thoughts about why this is an underappreciated part of the political, social, and economic crisis?
Yeah, I think I want to expand on the discourse. The discourse definitely has taken the direction of protecting what's actually going on in the country. Also associated to that is the safety to voice the issues within the country. Being there, as my colleagues say, you have to think every day. I'm waking up. What am I going to eat today? How am I going to make it? How am I going to survive? With my family. So that's kind of the focus of people. At the same time, if you raise your voice or you raise a concern about the issues that are happening, especially in the environment, you can be penalized in different ways. So NGOs, international NGOs, have to work a low profile, and they have to, if they want to survive. So the discourse, as I say, is oil spills, illegal mining. That you never see that in the news. That's kind of all basically a covered up that is not bringing out a balance, information of what's happening in the country. So that has to change. I mean, we can no longer hide the situation because we can see from the satellite images, from the pictures that we are getting from the field, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an important component. But as I say, the environmental catastrophe that is happening is affecting the social and economic fabric of the country, and that's where we need to figure out how to articulate all these problems. It's a huge problem. I mean, it's amazing. The richest country in South America, and cannot even feed their people, every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dahlmeier. Dr. Klein, Salas.
Yeah, I can add two more things about how this is a masked problem in Venezuela. One is what I call the dilution effect. I mean, looking at the last couple of years, pandemia, guerrilla, some other problems, nutrition, security, whatever. Environment is one more of them. So the people says, okay, this is another problem to the Venezuela. And I give you an example. The oil spill in Palito, which was 2 times the spill in Mauritius. Mauritius got all the attention, everything, all the media, BBC, all the global medias were looking at Mauritius, but not looking at El Palito. 2 times larger than that. So this is an illusion effect. Because of what I think that is this is another problem for that poor country. We know that Venezuela is ruined. Okay, that's it. The other things I think is happening is that the effects at the international level are not so big. Like, for example, the Amazon deforestation that would affect the whole globe as a repository of carbon, whatever. The oil spills are local. None of them has reached, for example, Colombia border. None of them has reached the Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire. So far, it's a local thing. What will happen if, for example, it occurs a major oil spill in Paraguay Peninsula? They will reach Guajira, Colombian Guajira, and there will be a major international problem. Maybe there, the people will start looking at Venezuela. There's a huge risk. But I think the two things, summarizing: one, it's a local problem. Second is a dilution effect of all the problems that we have in the country.
Thank you, Dr. Klein Salas. I've realized that we've already stretched people's time to 5:15. I want to ask each one of you to make very, very brief remarks, about 30 seconds or so, just to give us a conclusion, and also to give you a chance to say any final things that you think were undertreated or underemphasized in this event before we close up. So I will start with, I'll actually start with you, Dr. Klein Salas, and we can go in reverse order from how we started with opening presentations.
Yeah, I think we need to really take care about the awareness. This is my main concern. We need to let the people know what is happening in all the fora that we can access, international, local, community, whatever. This is the most important thing, because the people need to know, the world needs to know what is happening in Venezuela. The environmental problems are long-term, has long-term effects. And that will affect the coming generations. We will have a completely destroyed environment. We will affect not only economical values, but cultural values, biodiversity values. So we need to make the people know what is happening and to raise awareness to promote the actions towards the environmental problem in Venezuela.
Thank you, Dr. Klein Salas. Christina, Bourelli.
Yes, very briefly. I think it's, this may sound dramatic, but I truly believe it. I think the stage is set for serious criminal conflict in Venezuela that's going to spill over to surrounding countries. And it's critical to point out that the speed at which this tragedy is evolving will surely define the possibility of a future transition, the governability of such a transition, and the nature of Venezuela as a nation state for decades to come.
Thank you very much, Christina. Dr. Dahlmeier.
In addition to my colleague's voice, I think an important component will be to complete a diagnostic of the socioeconomic and environmental elements and the actors affecting the life, affecting the use and management of territorial management and the natural resources. This is possible now with the tools that we have, the satellite images and information from the ground, because we need to create a framework basically to revert the process, how things are going to work or should work in the future. Ecosystem services assessment, a well-developed quantitative scenario plannings, how we're going to manage natural resources in the future, how we are going to structure those processes, what areas to manage, and how we're going to control the devastating disaster that is basically occurring in all these areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dahlmeier. Let's finish where we started off. Michael, Eddy, any final remarks?
Well, just thanks, gratitude for everyone who participated, for all the panelists, and for CSIS. This definitely hit what we were trying to, the sweet spot of what we were trying to achieve. And I think somewhat to echo all of our panelists, right, not trying to, you know, that the world is ending, as you said, Ryan, but the seriousness of this, right, and some of the sense that we have is that while there are so many challenges in the region, it can be easy to say, all right, well, that's kind of just been that way for a while, and it doesn't impact me, it doesn't impact the United States, it doesn't impact the region, but that's not the case. And as Christina points out, as the environmental crimes continue and expand, and as the lack of governance and the non-state armed groups that have taken over there, this is going to impact the entire region, and maybe to a level that we just quite don't understand at this stage. So it's important that people understand what's going on there, and that we can be specific in different forums between, you know, working with the UN, we have opportunities with the EU coming up. We're going to continue on this to hopefully bring the information that all of you have heroically chronicled through your research, through your investigative journalism, through your satellite imagery. And we want to help continue to bring this to the world's awareness so that serious measures can be taken. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think we've established not only the gravity of the situation in Venezuela in terms of environmental degradation, But we've also established that this is such a complex issue that intersects with basically everything else that is going on in Venezuela that we could have gone on for well longer than what we did. And I thank our audience for their patience and their excellent questions, and also the panelists for their participation. Michael Eddy from USAID, Dr. Francisco Dahlmeier from the Smithsonian Institute, Christina Bourelli from the V5 Initiative and Senior Associate at CSIS Americas Program. And last but not least, Dr. Eduardo Klein Salas, who is joining us from Australia of Simon Bolivar University. Thank you all very much. All of your excellent work has informed our policy products on the CSIS Americas webpage, a policy brief, a podcast, as well as a video about this subject to raise awareness, as we've all discussed, is extremely important. So for viewers who are interested, please go on over to the CSIS webpage, go ahead and check out our policy products, to which all of these experts on our excellent panel have contributed in some way or another with their research. Thank you all very much again for being here. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.